What's up YouTube? Capital G here, giving you guys my quick Prank Kid strategy guide. This is going to be some of the effective ways that I think that you can actually deal with the deck, some cards that I think can really take advantage of that matchup, and just some general strategies that I have found to be very effective when dueling against Prank Kids. Now, we all know over the weekend, Prank Kids basically shocked the entire world. They pulled off one of the biggest upsets that I would probably say in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and they ended up taking down a YCS event that was damn near 1,800 people. The deck pretty much came out of nowhere, although it did get some new support in the Soul Fusion Special Edition, and it ended up taking the entire thing. And I watched the deck profile on Sammy's channel, and the winner was talking about his matchups in Swiss, and he said that, you know, his only losses were like to kind of other decks that were, I guess you could kind of say rogue, like, you know, Gem Knight, FTK, and stuff like that. He said that he had absolutely no problems when it came to Thunder Dragons, and he said that he didn't lose a single duel against like Sky Strikers. So it tells you that the deck is definitely legitimate. So I think one of the biggest things that you have to do when going into the Prank Kids matchup is not try to really stop them mid combo. You basically want to limit their ability to fusion summon to begin with. To that end, a couple of cards that I really love in the Prank Kids matchup, particularly if you are going first, are Anti-Spell Fragrance and Dimensional Barrier. You guys know that I talked about Dimensional Barrier in yesterday's video, and this is a card that's magnificent against Prank Kids if you're going first. Basically, these two cards just absolutely shut down the fusion side of the archetype, and really your opponent's entire turn by proxy. Your opponent will have access to the normal summon, but they're not going to be able to drop any of those link monsters, and all of those fusion cards that are in their hand, like instant fusion, invocation, polymerization, those are going to be absolutely dead. So your opponent's basically never going to be able to amount more than one monster on the field. Well, I guess unless they're playing something like Prankatrops, which that can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. But outside of them having that, they're not going to have access to drop a fusion monster in any capacity. Some people might be looking at a card like, you know, Prank Kids Pandemonium and saying, hey Cap, can't they chain that? No, actually they can't chain that to or Dimensional Barrier or Anti-Spell Fragrance, because you should be using Anti-Spell Fragrance or Dimensional Barrier in the draw/standby phase. The Pandemonium can only be activated during the main phase, so basically they'll never get the opportunity to actually drop the fusion monster. And since these cards can be activated and the standby phase and the main phase, I really like these cards because they can be effective against Denko Sekka. You can basically just shotgun these cards as soon as your opponent goes to their draw phase. Thus, they're already face up, or in Dimensional Barrier's case, it's already going to be resolved. Doesn't matter if your opponent drops the Denko at that point. They have absolutely no way of expanding upon their plays, and you basically get a turn of knowing that they're not going to be able to combo out, and you can hopefully just potentially kill them during the next turn. I also think a card that can be really good going first, and this is a card that is a little more niche because a lot of the link archetypes don't really have the ability to go into it, but if you do, if you're playing a deck like ABC, it can still be phenomenal, is Abyss Dweller. Abyss Dweller is kind of a forgotten card right now, but what a lot of people don't realize is that all four of your main deck Prank Kids monsters, yes, they do float and they have a lot of cute effects that activate. However, they activate in the graveyard. Abyss Dweller basically is a blanket. You ain't doing anything for the rest of your turn, and that case, your opponent can still fusion summon and they can still link summon to their heart's desires, but the Prank Kids monsters are not going to be floating at that point. They're going to hit the graveyard and they're going to stay in that graveyard unless your opponent, I don't know, has like, you know, Monster Reborn, or they have Soul Charge or some type of extender. Generally speaking, the Prank Kids player will probably not try to do all that much. And really one cool thing about Abyss Dweller is the Prank Kids monsters don't really have high attack. I mean, they basically cap out at 1,500 attack, so your opponent's going to struggle just to get over the Abyss Dweller in general. They're probably going to have to go for a desperation play because Abyss Dweller is a card that can actually lock them out for multiple turns. So I think Abyss Dweller is really good in this matchup as well because it kind of just stuns them for a couple of turns, and if you can back that up with a little bit of protection, you should be able to win within those turns. A card that's very similar to Abyss Dweller, but I think can be pretty useful if you're playing a deck like True Draco, especially a deck that doesn't even run an extra deck, let alone even if it did, probably wouldn't be able to make, you know, a card like Abyss Dweller consistently, is Soul Drain. Soul Drain works basically identical to Abyss Dweller. Soul Drain obviously having the ability to shut down the floatability of the Prank Kids archetype. When your opponent goes for those Prank Kids Link monsters or those Prank Kids Fusion monsters, they're not going to be able to get a whole bunch more from the deck. And even though it works basically identical to Abyss Dweller, it serves the same exact purpose. The thing that I really do like about Soul Drain in this matchup is the fact that it does have the surprise factor. A lot of times Prank Kids players will just straight up hard activate a polymerization kind of as their first move of the turn, going into a Prank Kids Rocket, for instance, and you think that, you know, maybe it's just numerically like not in their best interest to do something like that because they're basically using 3 cards to summon one monster. The thing is, they basically will just make it up on the back end because the 2 monsters that they put in are both going to flows, and then a lot of times they'll use Rocket Ride to just get those 2 monsters that were sent to the graveyard in the first place to just get them right back with the Rocket Ride Infernity Launcher like effect. However, if you hit them with that Soul Drain, those monsters are no longer going to flows, and now your opponent's kind of put in a weird position where they can use Rocket Ride, but if they really want to get rid of the Soul Drain, they probably have to go for just a really weird, like, you know, Nightmare Phoenix play, which will not only take a card out of their hand, but it also kind of uses up both of their monsters on the field, and those monsters are not going to float even after they got rid of the Soul Drain. So obviously Soul Drain is a really strong card in the Prank Kids matchup, but some of you guys are probably asking, Cab G, forget about that noise. What about going second? I'm beating the deck when I'm going first, but I'm having serious problems when I'm going second against Prank Kids. I don't know what to stop. I don't know what to side in. Are there any good cards for going second against the deck? Yes, I think there actually are. One card that I really like against the matchup is Evenly Matched going second. Evenly Matched looks like it's not really all that great on paper because they do have a couple of cards in Bow Wow and then Weather Washer. These are cards that can actually, you know, they can basically tribute themselves. If you just say enter battle phase, your opponent probably is going to activate those cards immediately. But the thing that you have to understand is, number one, their spells and traps can't tag themselves out. So if your opponent happens to have the continuous spell Prank Kids Pranks on the field, they're definitely going to lose that. They're going to lose their Prank Kids Place, the field spell, as well. If they're unfortunate and they have the Prank Kids Plan on the field, that's gone as well. And even if your opponent does activate the effect of Weather Washer summons 2 monsters to the field. Your opponent obviously can only keep 1 card when you evenly match them. So in any situation, especially if they happen to have those continuous spells on the field, even if they have the monsters that can tag themselves out, they're still going to be in a really shitty situation. So Evenly Match is a card that can basically get rid of a lot of their resources. Now keep in mind, this is going to cost you your battle phase, so if you're playing a deck that needs to be able to do a ton of battle damage, maybe this isn't the card that you want to run. But Evenly Match, if you're playing a deck that wants to control maybe an Altergeist or, you know, something like Sky Strikers where damage really isn't all that important, you're looking to outgrind your opponent and then be able to do damage against an open field, I think Evenly Match can be excellent when you're going second. There are a couple of hand traps that I think that can be really solid. These are more so just, you know, keep these certain hand traps in and know what hand traps to kind of take out. I don't really know if I like Ghost Ogre all that much because they do so much chain blocking, especially with Prank Kids Place. It can kind of be a bitch to ever actually end up hitting the right card, and if they've already got their search from Prank Kids Place, I'm not sure how effective Ghost Ogre is going to be. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to the hand traps, and this can be anything from impermanence to effect failure to Ghost Ogre, is that the monsters that tribute themselves, their links, they actually, or the links and the fusions, they are actually not cost. So when your opponent goes to tribute that monster, you do have the option to simply effect failure it or impermanence it. But when it comes to the negation cards that don't destroy, you gotta kind of be careful with that, because if you leave those monsters on field, your opponent will probably link into other cards that can actually tribute at that point. A couple of cards that I do like, I like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. I know that the Prank Kids players are running like 3 copies of Called by the Grave, but you know, you just run into that risk against a lot of decks in the meta. The reason that I like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is because the deck actually does a decent amount of searching. They have Pot of Desires, which is not a search card, but obviously it's always a really good, excellent card to hit. Just make sure that they don't get extra cards in their opening turn. You can also hit Terraforming, or you can hit the search of Prank Kids Place. And there's even one Prank Kids monster, Prank Kids Roxy, that has the ability to basically discard a card or trade a card from their hand, banish it, and then get a new card. So these are all cards that you can actually use Ash Blossom on. When it comes to Ghost Belle, I think Ghost Belle is not that bad either, because if your opponent uses Invocation, the fusion summon, as they sometimes will, you can actually use Ghost Belt in it because Invocation does have the effect that potentially lets you banish cards from the graveyard to summon an Invoke monster. So since it has that clause in it, it means that you can actually Ghost Belt and you can stop their fusion summoning. And as we said, if you stop their fusion summoning, their turn is basically kind of ass at that point. Another good thing is that Ghost Belt actually stops Ash Blossom. So if you're in kind of like this big chain war, right? Let's say your opponent activates a Pot of Desires. They're looking to draw a couple of cards. You Ash Blossom them. Ghost Belt would kind of be the only hand trap at that point that could counter the Called by the Grave. And you'll basically go 2 for 2, but you're simplifying the game state and you're still making sure that they're not fusion summoning, which is kind of the game plan. But stopping your opponent from fusion summoning second is quite difficult. That's why some of these hand traps have to be used to limit the cards that get them to the cards that let them fusion summon from the beginning. So I think that, you know, it's a matchup that can be particularly difficult going second, but when evenly matched and other cards like that, and you have to understand that they really don't have any hard negation with the exception of Totally Awesome, which obviously isn't part of their archetype. They can only summon that if they have 2 Dropsies on the field. I think that it can be manageable. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this short little guide. If you like guides like this against meta decks, let me know in the comment section below. I'll consider making some other ones. Hopefully you guys learned something, and if you know, there are other things or other cards that I missed, please leave those in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.